Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome back to a full week slated with these virtual programs. My name is Travis Gilbert. I'm the Educator and Collections Coordinator here at the Old Baldy Foundation. And we are so thankful and glad that you are joining us again for another week, just packed full of virtual programming. For the next 2 weeks, we're going to do a little bit briefer videos. We're still going to do 2 videos a day, one at 10 o'clock focusing on our collections, and one at 2 o'clock. We're going to be taking you out to a little slice of Bald Head Island and discussing that section of the island's history. And for the next 2 weeks, we'll be continuing that schedule, Tuesday through Saturday. Videos will just be a little more condensed, a little briefer. And then at the end of those 2 weeks, we're going to sit down and reevaluate the Old Baldy Foundation's path forward with continuing virtual programming and working here on site to come up with a plan on what our summer is going to look like here at the Old Baldy Foundation. So please stay tuned and continue to go on oldbaldy.org or here on our Facebook page to be up to date on the latest information from the foundation. So this morning in our archives, I pulled out what we call a South Carolina liquor dispensary bottle. It's a piece of a bottle, and it was found here in 1986 when there was an archaeological dig here on the lighthouse grounds. The archaeological dig was completed by students from the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, and they came here to really kind of learn about 3 questions, historical questions, or 3 research narratives around the lighthouse grounds. First was they wanted to learn a little bit more information about the construction of Old Baldy Lighthouse, and specifically the foundation of the lighthouse. There was never any archaeological excavations completed before 1986 on the lighthouse grounds, so no one had really penetrated the foundation of the lighthouse. So they wanted to go down a little bit and roughly 5 feet and see what was occurring beneath the surface there in the construction of Old Baldy. The second research question is, they knew that the chapel, the village chapel of Bald Head Island, was going to be constructed in the near future. And the village chapel was located on historically significant land for 2 reasons. First of all, Fort Holmes, the northern or western wall of Fort Holmes, circumnavigated the exact path of where the village chapel was going to be completed. It was an area called Battery Number 4. It is where the fort's wall, made out of sand or earthen ramparts, made a turn from being a north-south wall to being an east-west wall. So it made a kind of a right-hand turn located at the saltwater marsh, and the wall went westward rather than northward. So there was an area where there were magazines, man-made caves, where they stored ammunition. The Confederates stored ammunition. And also there was an area where there was artillery. So a significant amount of activity at that location where the current village chapel is today during the American Civil War. So the researchers and the archaeologists understood that that area of land might reap some kind of archaeological remains or clues about the lifestyle of the Confederate soldiers and their artillery here at Fort Holmes. And lastly, probably the largest historical question or research question that faced these archaeologists in 1986 was the 2 out of the 3 keepers' cottages that were had a tenure here at Old Baldy Lighthouse from about the American Civil War through 1931, when the last keeper's cottage burned down. They were located in land between Old Baldy Lighthouse and where the proposed village chapel was going to be constructed in the 1980s. And no one knew for certain where exactly those 2 keepers' cottages were. There were photographic evidence of 2 of these keepers' cottages. There were 3 keepers' cottages in the history of Old Baldy. The first we have no photographic evidence of, and that was the brick keeper's cottage that was constructed simultaneously with Old Baldy Lighthouse in the year 1816, 1817. There's no photographic evidence of that keeper's cottage. It is the only of the three keeper's cottages we have no likeness of or no depiction of, and significantly, it is the only of the three keeper's cottages that was located to the west or slightly northwest of Old Baldy Lighthouse, where the keeper's cottage is located today on our grounds, the reconstructed keeper's cottage. The two later keeper's cottages that were being researched and hopefully excavated by these archaeologists in 1986 were located to the east of Old Baldy Lighthouse. Again, in that grassy area between the oil house and Old Baldy and the village chapel today. In 1986, no one knew exactly where those keeper's cottages were. They believed that there would be remains of those cottages, pilings, and various discards, refuge piles, trash pits, basically, cisterns. There would be, significant amounts of remains just underneath the surface that would give these archaeologists and the Old Baldy Foundation clues about where these keeper's cottages were located, its size, and most importantly, the lifestyle of these lighthouse keepers. So they began digging and they made 5 kind of test pits or areas. They went roughly 5 feet into the ground, and there was a significant amount of cultural resources that were uncovered through that dig. Many of those resources are now here at the Old Baldy Foundation in our archives. And I will tell you, one of the most interesting pieces that were uncovered, in my opinion, is this South Carolina liquor dispensary bottle. So before I get into that, I'd love to hear from you all out there. Noni, good morning, Noni, from out there. I believe you're out in East Beach. It's great to hear from you. Thank you for tuning in, Noni. And anybody else out there listening, give us a shout out. I'd love to know where you're listening from, what your connection to Bald Head Island is. If you've joined us for previous episodes, I'd love to hear from you out there. So this idea, everyone in North Carolina is kind of familiar with the ABC store. There is no ABC store on Bald Head Island. You've got to go over to Southport and get your liquor. So the story of these dispensary bottles from South Carolina is not too dissimilar to the process in getting liquor or acquiring liquor on Bald Head Island today. So it begins way back in the late 19th century, all right? So South Carolina, beginning around 1880, started enacting prohibition laws. Prohibition meaning that a populace of voters in a specific area, such as a state or eventually the nation or even a locale, a municipality, they're going to, through popular referendum by voting, ban the sale of liquor. And so in the 1880s, this temperance movement, this movement to abolish the sale and consumption of alcohol, started fermenting. You get my joke there. That was a terrible joke. But it started chugging along. It started to gain traction at a grassroots level from the voters of South Carolina. So much so, by 1882, various locales or various municipalities or towns or townships within South Carolina voted to enact prohibition. 78 towns by 1882 enacted laws banning the sale and consumption of alcohol within their town or county limits. And a decade later, by 1892, this temperance movement gained enough attraction within the voters of South Carolina that there was going to be a statewide referendum, meaning that the state was going to go to the voting box or the ballot box the next time they had a statewide election, and they were going to vote once and for all whether they were going to allow the continued consumption and sale of alcohol or whether they were going to ban this. And the voters overwhelmingly approved the measure. They voted in 1892 to ban the sale of alcohol. So enter the governor of South Carolina at the time. His name was Benjamin Tillman. His nickname was Pitchfork Ben. He had most of his support from the western part of South Carolina, up in the Piedmont or the mountain areas, think Greenville, Spartansburg, all that. And he was a farmer. He was a member of this kind of populist movement that had gained traction in the late 19th century throughout many states in the American South. One of the most famous examples of a populist movement that occurred in the American South in the 1890s was here in North Carolina, and specifically here in Wilmington. There was a fusion movement, meaning that the Republicans at the time fused with dissatisfied Democrats who were largely farmers, and they collectively fused their political power to overwhelmingly vote out the kind of traditional Republicans and the traditional Democrats. So populist movements have a long history, and in the 1890s in the American South, very much so. So Benjamin Tillman was a populist. And you can imagine that the populists didn't take very well that South Carolina had voted for Prohibition. So Benjamin Tillman started to use his political power to sidestep this popular referendum from the statewide voters in order to get his own way. And he decided that he was going to create a state-owned monopoly for liquor sales, aka an ABC store. Not too dissimilar than what we have today. He passed it through the House and the Senate, and what he created in this year 1892 was again a statewide monopoly. There was going to be a dispensary or a dispenser in the seat of each county, and that was going to sell this liquor that was produced by the state in a central facility in South Carolina state capital, Columbia. And from that central distillery in Columbia, they would send out to each county seat and its established dispensary or ABC store these bottles of liquor. And there would be a huge amount of, hopefully, in the eyes of the governor, a huge amount of tax revenue that would be produced from this statewide monopoly on liquor sales. Again, not kind of too dissimilar than what is happening today in North Carolina. So good morning, Kara. Good morning, Tony. It's great to hear from you all this morning. Andrea and Wayne from Bahama, North Carolina. Love the videos, love learning more of the history. Well, Andrea, it is our pleasure to be bringing you these videos. Good morning to you and Wayne out there in Bahama. So, of course, with a statewide monopoly, and as most of us really enjoy the history of the 20s, the 1920s that is, but even beforehand, there's going to be a significant amount of corruption, and there's going to be a significant amount of bootlegging that's going to occur after Governor Tillman creates this statewide monopoly or dispensary system in our sister state to the south, South Carolina. And the southern term for bootleggers or speakeasies or blind tigers. I love that name. We need a bar in Wilmington named the Blind Tiger. But the blind tigers, they proliferate in South Carolina. These speakeasies, these areas where you're going to go and get bootleg liquor, and it would be much cheaper, probably much less quality, but much cheaper. So Governor Tillman is faced in the 1890s and the early part of the 20th century with sending out constables. At one point, he had to send out the state militia in order to enforce this statewide monopoly on liquor sales. You can imagine there was almost a little civil war in the town of Willington There was a rebellion of sorts from the locals in Willington over the statewide monopoly. There were bootleggers that kind of broke out of prison, and Governor Tillman had to send in the militia to reinstill orders. He had to declare martial law and take over the telegraph, and a precursor to the telephone, if you will, more similar to texting, believe it or not, than the telephone. And he had to declare martial law to take over the railroads all over the statewide monopoly on liquor. And they raided blind tigers. It was a mess, and it was definitely an opportunity for Governor Tillman to sometimes supersede his executive power as governor, and certainly an opportunity for him to reward political patrons and political supporters. You could imagine there was a certain amount of employment opportunity and economic opportunity and very less legal opportunities that were created out of the statewide monopoly of liquor sales. But it did make a significant amount of money in tax revenue for South Carolina. In 1899, almost a decade after enacting this statewide monopoly, Governor Tillman could count $414,000 in tax revenue for the state of South Carolina. And it was all on the sale of this monopolization of liquor sales. And that is how we figured out this bottle. So this would have been a bottle of some sort of liquor that again was uncovered here at the remains of those two keepers' cottages, I think after the American Civil War through 1931. So clearly this liquor bottle came to Old Baldy Lighthouse to be consumed by a lighthouse keeper, one of their family members, or perhaps one of their guests. And it would have been here, you think, in the 1890s into the early part of the 20th century. So it's fairly easy to pinpoint the date for these liquor bottles, which is a little uncommon because there were many bottles that are in the collections, many pieces of bottles that were uncovered by these archaeologists. And the dates for the manufacturing of those bottles, whether it be perfumes or medicinal bottles, a much broader time frame. So there are many keepers and their families and perhaps their guests that could have consumed the products within those other bottles. But this had such a short time frame, it's very, very easy to pinpoint which keeper this came from, and that is Sonny Dozier. It is very, very likely either Sonny Dozier or, again, one of his family members or one of his guests consumed the contents of this bottle, whether it be bourbon or another type of whiskey or gin or vodka. I'm thinking that Sonny Dozier, I'm just taking a guess out there. I'm thinking he was a bourbon guy. I'm thinking he was a whiskey guy for some reason or another. I'm just getting that sense here on this historic hallowed land. He's speaking to me right now. I think he was a whiskey guy. But you might ask, how do we know? We know the time frame for Sonny Dozier because he had a long 30-some-year career at Old Baldy, and there's plenty of leeway. There's about a decade before and a decade after that Old Baldy is serving, that Sonny Dozier is serving at Old Baldy Lighthouse when the South Carolina liquor dispensary was in operation. So give or take 10 years on each side of the liquor dispensary's operation, Sonny Dozier is still here. So very, very likely. But how do we know that it was a South Carolina liquor dispensary bottle? If you look, the bottle shard has a palmetto tree on it. All right. And that was the universal symbol. That was kind of the trademark or the logo of the South Carolina liquor dispensary operations. It was this palmetto, and at the bottom of the palmetto, you can just make out here it's chipped. There were two kind of planks laid in a cross at the base of the palmetto tree's trunk. Also on this, it says it has its initials, thankfully, SC. We don't know what's on each side of the SC, but you can see there, perhaps the camera, SC there. So that was our clues. It was the palmetto tree and then the SC initials, of course, universal for South Carolina. So it is on those two clues that we, as a staff, began researching and uncovered this story of the liquor dispensary. So clearly Sonny Dozier or his family or one of his guests or a combination of all the above enjoyed, hopefully, the contents of this liquor bottle before, of course, with an empty bottle, they chucked it in their trash pit somewhere around the lighthouse grounds, and it would sit there for nearly 100 years or just a little less until archaeologists uncovered it in the late 1980s. So what happened after, and how do we know it was Sonny Dozier? Well, by 1906, there was so much corruption in this statewide monopoly on liquor sales that the state legislature abolished the South Carolina monopolization on liquor, or the state's dispensary. 1906. So it was in operation from about 1892 when the law was passed until 1906. And Sonny Dozier is serving until about 1913, 1915, circa those dates. So very quickly, easy. Curious enough, in 1915 is when South Carolina passes a referendum outlawing, I'll use that word, outlawing the statewide consumption or sale of liquor. So there's a prohibition law passed as a state in South Carolina in 1915. So about a decade after destroying the monopoly, they pass prohibition. And they went dry on January 1st, 1916, down in South Carolina. Now, you got to wonder, when was prohibition in effect here in North Carolina? Well, it's from 1909 to 1935. So Sonny Dozier, Keeper Dozier, or whoever consumed this whiskey or liquor with him was, hopefully, it seems like the dates are adding up, following all kinds of laws. So it was... Again, the Watts Act was passed in 1903 here in North Carolina, and that banned all sale of liquors in unincorporated areas. So you could only go and get liquor in a town. You think in Brunswick County, really Southport is where you've got to go, or Smithville, perhaps at this time, is where you got to go to get your liquor if you're Sonny Dozier in the late 19th century. And then that is passed even further by 1905, the Ward Law. It extended prohibition where you could only go and get liquor in towns that were incorporated and had a larger population of 1,000 people. 1,000 people or more. So Southport did not have that population, curious enough. So that was coming from the sixth light to continue the sale and consumption of alcohol. There we are, we're back. Sorry there, Wi-Fi. There we are. Wi-Fi is going a little crazy. See, the Wi-Fi doesn't like talking about prohibition either. So there's only 21 counties that vote against prohibition, and so 21 out of 100. Seems like most North Carolinians were in favor. And of course, there was prohibition nationally passed by the 18th Amendment, and that would not be repealed until 1933. So at the later end of Sonny Dozier's career, he would not have had any liquor at all. Now, how does this tie into our lives today? Well, of course, here at Old Baldy, just like Sonny Dozier did, or one of his guests, you go to the state monopoly, the ABC store, and purchase your liquor. So not too dissimilar to what Sonny Dozier was doing here over 125 years ago, really. It's kind of incredible how similar Sonny Dozier's lifestyle was to the 21st century lifestyle here on Bald Head Island. And even further, I think South Carolina, some of you may be familiar out there, it wasn't until 2006 that you could go to South Carolina and get a drink where the bartender pours it just like in Wilmington today or anywhere else in North Carolina. If you recall, it was from 1973 to 2006 that down in South Carolina, you could only get liquor through airplane bottles. It kind of, unusual. They didn't have the handles or the 1.75 milliliters that you would see in a bar today in Charleston or up here in Wilmington. If you recall, down in South Carolina, there had the little airplane bottles. So any time that somebody in a bar or restaurant wanted to make you a drink, they had to open up an airplane bottle and pour it into whatever mixer that you were getting or whatever cocktail. And that was the way it was passed. So it kind of curious. Not, again, too dissimilar to the monopolization and the laws that faced Sonny Dozier in between him purchasing this bottle and the contents of this bottle reaching his lips. So thank you for joining us this morning. I think it's kind of fun to explore some of the archaeological contents, the cultural remains that were found in that excavation here at the lighthouse grounds. And certainly this is one of the more fun or jovial items that were uncovered. And I think not only is it fun, this liquor bottle really shows us how connected we are to the individuals that lived on Bald Head Island over 100 years ago. Their consumption of liquor very much rhymes with our consumption of liquor and other spirits here on Bald Head Island today. So we are not too far removed. Sonny Dozier would be very familiar with going to the ABC store with us if he were here in the 21st century. So I promise, I know McCallie's out there. McCallie's done a significant amount of research. McCallie Givens is on our staff. She works with our collections and with our retail operations. And she has done a significant amount of research and work with the archaeological remains that were uncovered there in the late 1980s here on Old Baldy's grounds. So I promise that I will bring McCallie back on a future episode and we'll pull out even more of what was uncovered underneath the surface here at Old Baldy Lighthouse. Again, this afternoon, we will be bringing you another edition of Touring with Travis out in the field. We'll talk about some aspect of the island's history. And we will be back the rest of this week through Saturday with, again, 10 o'clock discussing a piece of our collections, and at 2 o'clock taking you out to a part of the island. In the meantime, if you would like to find past episodes of our virtual content, you can go to our Facebook page here, also on Instagram TV, and the Old Baldy Foundation additionally has a YouTube channel. And when you go to the YouTube channel, hit subscribe for me. I'd love for you to do that and help increase our social media presence and our audience. While you're at oldbaldy.org, check out Jess, our retail operations, individual that runs our retail operations. She has a wonderful online store, all our apparel, our games, our children's toys, puzzles, books, decor, all that, you name it, it is on there, oldbaldy.org. And when you shop on our online store, you are supporting a great mission and a great cause to continually preserve North Carolina's oldest standing lighthouse and to increase our efforts and our endeavors in interpreting our cultural resources here on Old Baldy Lighthouse. Artifacts like this dispensary bottle that help unravel the story of this island and the folks like Sonny Dozier who called this island home long before we did. So thank you for joining us this morning, and we will see you in a future episode. You all stay healthy and you stay positive out there. On behalf of the entire Old Baldy Foundation, thank you for social distancing, and thank you to our essential employees, all our grocery store workers and truck drivers, and certainly our medical personnel, our doctors and our nurses and their support teams at our hospitals, our nursing homes, our laboratory workers and our researchers who are working to create more tests and working towards a vaccine. Everybody is doing their part. No big, no little. Everybody's part in stemming this pandemic is important. And we thank you all for all your endeavors and all your activities to get our society back on track and get our life as close as we can to what was normal before all this mess. And Frank, nice t-shirt. Yes, Roast and Toast this fall. This fall is one of our fundraisers here at Old Baldy. The Old Baldy Foundation assists with this Roast and Toast on the Coast. It's a weekend full of slated activities. It's going to occur in November this year. We are the beneficiary of some of the money that's raised through Roast and Toast on the Coast, but it is Baldy Island Limited that runs and facilitates the fundraiser. So thank you, Frank, for the t-shirt. I couldn't have paid you enough to give us a shout out for that. So I gotta run to a staff meeting, folks, on Zoom. I'm gonna, do my Zoom etiquette. You all stay safe and you stay positive out there, and we will see you at a future episode. Thanks for tuning in.